Thank you so much. Hey guys, we are here to talk to you about the edge of the inbox and innovation and email, and we're super excited. Raj Choudhary is going to start us off. He's with Brightwave. I'm gonna help him. We're gonna talk a little bit about AMP for email, Google AMP, and what it means. So Raj is going to talk us through what it is and why we should care, and we're going to kind of nerd out pretty hard, and then Seth is actually going to bring it home. Seth Weisfeld from Pinterest has actually been doing this stuff, so we're really excited to see what he's been doing and show that off. And then you guys don't leave early for lunch. Lunch is after this, by the way, but don't leave early because Jens is going to bring it home with some amazing stories from Shinesty, and if you haven't opted into their emails, I pretty much guarantee you will at the end of this. So you guys are in for a real treat. But like I said, Raj Choudhary is going to start us off and introduce us to AMP for email.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to kind of talk through really AMP and really more talk through. I'm trying to figure out the clicker here. Thank you. Really talk through what it really means for the industry and less about AMP itself, if that makes sense. But I'm going to kind of give you a view on how I think about it and how it's impacting our industry, right? So if you hadn't heard, a couple of months ago, AMP was announced by Google, so AMP for email, essentially, right? And it kind of dropped a big bombshell on the industry in the sense that what it could be, right? And it's kind of an exciting moment and a milestone for us in the industry, and think about where we can really go with this kind of stuff. And so, as I'm going to kind of tell you a story of what it means and really the evolution of how that came to be. And I'm actually going to use media, so banners specifically in a correlation with email to kind of tell that story. And then we'll kind of show some examples of how we think it could look like, and then Seth is going to show you really how it really is within Pinterest, which is fantastic. And then as Kristen mentioned, Shinesty is just going to show us really the edge of everything else. So I'm borrowing a little bit from Simsa's slides earlier, which is really just bring that kind of evolution, right? So we all know that emails and banners, really came to their fruition in the late 90s. It was kind of an interesting time to start seeing those kind of things. But in the early days, what did it really look like, right? Well, it was kind of basic. We kind of assembled emails and we sent it out to everyone. Banners were pretty static, right? At best, what we were really thinking about was, how do we reduce the case size, right? If you're as old as me, then you remember the days of basically trying to make sure that a banner wasn't over a certain case size, and an email didn't have a ton of images and stuff like that, because you're dealing with dial-up and DSL and things like that, right? I certainly spent a lot of time doing color correction and all that kind of stuff with emails and all that kind of stuff. So what's interesting is that as we evolved, we started seeing the introduction of Flash on the media side of things, and then a rapid increase in broadband and things like that. So what that actually did was an interesting thing for the media side, and it kind of created a standardization, right? So Flash banners came out to be, right, which created a standard for what the output would be. And I know in the email world, we've certainly wished for that, right? Certainly I know, like, we all wish there was a standard out there instead of the variation we see in email clients and so forth, which makes it very, very hard. And that kind of actually led that industry or that vertical to have a leapfrog moment, right? And so we kind of saw those huge moments, if you will. So in the tangible sense, we started experimenting with, on the email side, personalization, right? Things like that. So, Betsy, you've got mail and things like that. And we started playing with content and everything else. It was kind of an interesting moment, if you will, but yet we were still largely sending, an email out to everyone, right? The content really wasn't changing outside of some personalization, right? On the banner side of things of the world, you started seeing more data being collected, right? And that data being used to fuel, how the creative would change and so forth. So banners, flash banners in that sense kind of transformed the industry, and email was lagging in where we could actually do that, right? So kind of this next evolution was that, we saw massive, infusion of data, right? On the media side, it was interesting, right? So you started seeing the rise, the rise of DMPs, data management platforms, SSPs, supply-side platforms, DSPs, demand-side platforms, ad networks, and things like that. And data was really fueling what you could do. On the email side as well, we started seeing that data was starting to infuse what you could do. It's pretty tremendous, in fact, right? So you started seeing, logic-driven campaigns happening, right? You started seeing behavior-based dynamic content and all that kind of good stuff, right? So now we're getting to a stage where, we're creating different types of creative, different types of variations, all that kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, the technology and the data were coming together in a really meaningful way. And it was a big kind of moment in that time period, right? But what it also did was it created a massive scale issue for us, right? A lot of us in this kind of, 2000s, late 2000s, early 2010s, we were trying to deal with how much content we could create and meaningfully use that within the platforms, right? So kind of moves on, in the kind of next period of time, if you will, we kind of see this evolution of, programmatic really happening, right? And that's basically fueling what we can actually do, and machine learning and AI and so forth kind of taking over that aspect of things. And the email world as well, it was a big moment as well, because you started having, the consolidation of ESPs, you started getting data and technology coming together in a more meaningful fashion. You were starting to hit it from multiple sides of things, so you can do just a lot more. So we started moving into really an era of data infusing, multi-tier programs. You were doing more dynamic content. You saw the rise of location-based triggers. You saw time being a factor. You saw this massive infusion of innovation happening in the inbox, right? So a lot of startups started to kind of build up and kind of grow that side of things, right? The maturity level of the media side actually started to, hit its point, but the email side just exploded, right? I know if you've been in the industry, the last 3 years have been some of the most exciting period in our industry. We just see a massive amount of things we can actually do with content and so forth. So, it's pretty cool. So, what you had was this, this plethora of technology enabling content at scale, really, right? It was pretty fantastic to see. And it's interesting when you bring it back to AMP, right? So, at this level, we're still basically rendering emails at time of load, right? We can basically make a decision, we can pre-assemble, and then, based on geo, based on time, based on a lot of different things, we can then basically serve the right kind of content at the right time, right? But it's still a single-way, logic-driven discussion, right? AMP really sets the stage for us to start saying, well, what if we can actually have a bidirectional method of talking, right? What if an action then creates a different set of criteria to then load different types of data and so forth, right? In the email world, we still go down a path of a linear type model, right? And so what's exciting for me on AMP, whether it's AMP or something else, by the way, right? It doesn't have to be AMP necessarily. We're talking about AMP today, but it's the notion that we can actually start thinking about bidirectional data flows and bidirectional movement in the UI itself, right? It's kind of an exciting moment if we can actually get there, if you will. So what do I mean by that, right? So really what I'm talking about is that, if you're using data, right, normally we assemble the data and we send it out, right? But what if you can actually have data coming in and out and then changing things? So data syncing, right, at a different level can change really everything else. Actions, an action within an email changes really what the email is, right? A behavior changes things, right? We've typically always looked at email in a single view path, right? We can assemble the data. When we load, we can then look at it. But what happens when we start doing things on the fly? Basically, we start mimicking app-like type functionality or website type functionality. So, this is just a look at really how that kind of transcends. An action basically changes something, right? The email itself changes completely. And of course, we can do that today with, show hide and those kind of functions. And there's fantastic, tools out there that allow us to do some other things, the Movable Inks of the world and so forth. They paid me as well, by the way, for a little plug. But a lot of the platforms themselves have allowed us to do these kind of things, right? So again, I'm talking about completely changing the user experience, if you will, right? Now, this is less about us wanting people to come back to an email, right? And much more about assembling an email that has the right content day one when they look at it, and then allowing them to complete an action within the email itself, right? And so we've, again, been very constrained in doing that within the canvas that we have. But what AMP or something else like it is really allowing us to do is to think about, completely taking that linear approach and really completely rethink the UI on itself, right? So, what is it really, right? I didn't spend a ton of time talking about really, what are the nitty-gritties of AMP, right? But essentially AMP, in the world for us is basically a framework, a coding framework that allows us to quickly develop content, develop mini applications, if you will, okay? But it really allows us to create scale. Scale is an important aspect of things. Creating scale for us allows us to be more efficient and can be a lot more relevant to the customer. At the end of the day, if we can be very relevant to our customers, and we can take away the barriers to complete an action, then we can be very successful in the campaigns we do. So if you think about it from this kind of scenario, right? If you've got data that can change, complex logic scenarios, right, and so forth, and an action changes the UI, if you will, then AMP could be an answer for you, right? If you think about an app experience that you have today or website that you have today, right? And it's very hard to change that, whether it's a big process to do it, it's politically hard to get a website sign-up process to change, then you can actually do this within the email itself and kind of test out those scenarios, right? The framework that AMP allows makes it very, very easy to kind of test out those quick scenarios, if you will, right? So, how does it work, right? So AMP is essentially just, it's a coding framework, so it allows basically a different mem type. So mem types, if you're not familiar with, today we use a text mem type and a HTML mem type. In fact, there used to be, and still is in some platforms, a third mem type, which is a rich text mem type. And all that is basically when an email loads, it says, is this text, what client is this, right? So should I serve up the HTML or should I serve up the text version? That's about it, right? It's basically saying, what should I load up? So third mem types already exist in rich text, we just don't use it anymore. So to enable this, it's really the ESPs that have to add the third mem type, right? So you can have that. Email clients then recognize that to say, I'm going to serve up this. In this case with AMP specifically, it's only going to really work, I'd imagine, initially on G Suite, so Gmail, and possibly their app. Seth probably has some better insights on that for us, and he can share those. So that's what's really required from it. The coding framework itself is not very complicated. In fact, it's very established, right? So AMP has been around for a while. There's a lot of coding knowledge out there. It's a very easy framework. You can actually put in the code with very little training and so forth if you have good engineers. So it's not that far away, if you will. The unfortunate thing is that no one really knows until Google really announces where they're going to go with this, right? We know there's a big UI change coming with Gmail. There's developer access that a lot of people are trying to get into. Seth is probably the one who's going to show us really what that is and how his engineers have done it. But for me, it's really this kind of massive watershed moment, which is that we can start completely affecting the user experience, right? And create the right level of relevancy and the right level of path to complete an action within the email. And we can basically take away the barriers that email has had in those. We've basically just designed a static thing. Before I hand it over to Kristen's actually going to show you some kind of proof of concepts that we've done at Brightwave. And we're super grateful to Chick-fil-A and RentPath for allowing us to use them as almost guinea pigs and see how we could actually take this. The interesting side of things is that it's actually been very hard to push ourselves as an agency to rethink of how you do this, right? So if you think about this in your organizations, when you're thinking about when something like AMP does come out, and I'm really hoping this is really a big moment for us, your designers are very used to designing in a linear path, right? Your developers are very used to coding just the HTML. So it actually takes a completely different mindset, and we've had to push our team very hard to say, forget everything you know about designing for email or developing for email, and think conceptually like an app developer, like a website developer, and rethink everything. And so you'll see some examples. I'll pass on to Kristen here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I get the fun part here, guys. So what we did at Brightwave is we put together a couple of just conceptual examples of how AMP could be used. These aren't necessarily live in market, but the first one that we did was for Chick-fil-A, and it's an interactive catering experience. So what it's doing is it's mimicking that sort of app, web-like experience in email. It's pushing the conversion funnel a little bit further into the email space, which is a really cool thing and something that we've not totally been able to do. So we've seen engagement like this, but as Raj has mentioned, it really limits the need for scale. It's a more scalable solution. It limits the need for dev. It's a little bit easier to develop. I don't want all the developers to chase me out of here or anything, but it's easier than if you were trying to make a change for the app, for example, or on .com. It's easier done in email. And it just shifts that research stage into the inbox. So it's a really cool way of accepting data. You see that this is actually changing states based on the inputs that are submitted. Ignore that mouse cursor. I don't know how that got on mobile. But you see it's accepting all of that data, and then it's providing a recommendation that can then also be changed based off of the inputs provided. So if you're adding items, removing items, the image is changing, and then it'll then populate the recommendation into a .com experience where you can complete the transaction. The next one that we did is for Rent.com. And so this is more of an inbox search experience. Imagine you're searching for a new apartment and you get this email. You can actually view the apartment with 360 images in the inbox. You can sort of take a tour, if you will, and you don't have to leave your inbox to do so. So it's really cool. You can also change your search preferences. You'll see in a second here it's going to change out the number of bedrooms. You can change out your price limits, and everything changes based off of those inputs provided. So here we're looking at different locations, we're looking at different prices, different numbers of bedrooms, and all of the recommendations are changing based off of those inputs. So you can capture this data, you can store it, you can just change the email states based off of it. But But again, shifting that research stage into the email itself, into the inbox. So it's just a really cool sort of concept of something that could be done with AMP for email. It is possible, and our next speaker, Seth, is actually going to show you what he's been doing with this. So Seth is with Pinterest. He has been showing us, well, he's a part of my life heavily, I guess. The brand is, at least. Helped influence just about every decision I've made in the last 5 years. But guys, Seth is going to talk to you about Pinteractive email.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we're there with you every night as you go to bed.
It's true.
Awesome. Everybody, so I am Seth. I lead our product teams on our growth traffic efforts. That includes our emails, our notifications, our SEO, and our paid. Today, I want to talk about some of our email strategy, how we approach email design, a little bit about where we started at, where we are today, and where we're going in the future with our email programs. I always like to start out with a little bit about what Pinterest is. So for some people, Pinterest is a social network. But for most people, Pinterest is really a personalized discovery engine, right? We take what you look at, what you search for, what you interact with, we create a custom profile, and then we recommend ideas to you that are gonna inspire you to do new things, try new things in your life, and ultimately, like, make your life better. Everything from cooking dinner tonight to starting a business. When we think about our emails, the fundamental approach we take is to bridge that product experience into the inbox. So one of our core email types are pin recommendations. We take the pins that you interact with on the product, and we're gonna bring that into email. So this is one I personally got. I was looking for ideas on how to use blood oranges, and I get this great email that's got, that mimics our in-product experience. It's got the same masonry grid layout. It's got most importantly, that personalized aspect. Last time I was here, I talked about the machine learning that goes into being able to send just me, just this one email. If you want to learn more about that, you can grab me later. For today, I'm going to really focus on how we got to this design. How do we get to the place where our email is unbelievably simple, right? It is one line of text, a logo, and then the pins. Well, if we start going way back to 2015, our emails weren't so simple. We had a jumble of a whole lot of things in there. We used a design language the product had long ago abandoned. I think we moved away from this design language in 2013. Emails still look like this in 2015. We've got a script pin it button. Unfortunately, the emails are so old, they don't render anymore, so I couldn't get a screenshot of this. But there used to be an app upsell at the top of the email, and a whole lot of other stuff up in the header, really separating you from the content. So by the end of 2015, we took an initiative to refresh our emails. And we went from the old one to the new one. This new one was great. We got about a 2 to 10% lift on click-through rates by rolling out the new design. It took us a lot of work, though. These rounded corners on the pins, like, I could spend the next 20 minutes just telling you all about the internal debates to be able to get this out the door, and like, why doesn't it look right in Outlook 2007? It's cool, because they don't support that CSS, y'all. That's, of course, not what I told our executive team. Okay, so we don't stop there, though. We are always doing iterations on designs. So it might look like this email design that we shipped in 2015 is where we are today, but we've actually taken a lot of steps, and we are constantly doing small experiments. So the first thing we did is we had removed the pin it button from the email. We thought, hey, let's put it back. This actually led to a drop in clicks on the email. We were also going to be internationalizing the pin it button. So we decided to ditch that in our next experiment, and we put the CTA button up top. We thought this was a great idea, right? Like, call to action right there, right in front of people. They hated it. This was a massive, massive loser. So on to the next one. We kind of clean things up here in this next iteration. You see, we get rid of some of that stuff at the top. We really focus on the pins, bring them up to the very top of that email. This one was a really good step for us, positive movement. Finally, towards the end, this is about the end of 2016, we reintroduced the save button in the email. We had removed some of the board attribution information, which allowed us to get that in there. And we had this happy design for a long time. It was a really good email. It was our foundation. But if the content is what matters, we had this great idea. let's put more content in the email. Let's add a third column. And we did, and it was great, except for the fact that that increased our HTML size, and Gmail started clipping our emails like crazy. This comes up again later. So we were confronted with a really hard decision. What do we do? Do we have more pins in the email, more of the visual discovery opportunities, or do we have this save call to action? So we ran a bunch of experiments to try and figure that out, and ultimately, putting more content in the email is what won out. So that's where we are today. Of course, we always want to be experimenting. So the next thing we've been working on recently is trying to add some interactivity to the email. What happens if we could bring in our in-app experience, where when you hover over a pin, you get the save button shows up. It's also a little washed out, you can't see it, but there's a gray overlay here that kind of comes onto the pin. So this is really cool, right? Like this is in the inbox, this is just CSS HTML, there's nothing advanced here, this is standard email interactivity stuff. Problem is, the email gets clipped to Gmail. So what we had to do was balance and decide how we would run this experiment. So what we did is our standard email has 18 pins in it. For the hover effect email, we ran it with 12 pins. So we could see that we got roughly a 0.5% to 1% lift in clicks when we had 12 pins in the email versus 12 pins with hover. Interactivity works, that's great. The problem is that 12 pins with hover versus 18 pins is still a loss of about 1% in clicks. So we're stuck in this world where we can't innovate in the inbox because the most important thing we have to offer is the content itself, and that's going to restrict us. We're investigating a lot of different options here, like dropping support for old versions of Outlook so that we don't have to inline our CSS, and doing other things to minimize. But every time that we make an improvement in how much HTML we can fit in the email, what do we use it for? More pins, right? Which is why earlier this year when Google came to us to talk about AMP, we were incredibly excited. Because AMP gives us a platform to be able to do all the different things we want to do. Have 18 pins, or 20 pins, or 100 pins in the email, and have the interactivity, and have even more. So we developed, using AMP, this version of the pin email. So let's walk through this. As you can see, we still have the same hover effect. And in fact, it uses the same CSS and HTML here in the AMP email as we do in the other emails. I can mouse over, and I see this. Where things start getting fun is I can tap into the pin. And here I can see a close-up right in the inbox, right? Right, without having to leave where I am, I can get this rich experience. And I can get more from my email. It really provides value for me. I can navigate around. I can even potentially save in the inbox. That's that two-way bidirectional communication that Raj was talking about. When I can save, that means that the email can be sending data down, as well as we can send data into the email of like what boards you have. So I can click save, it's great. I can do this nice toast, right? We can have a lot of rich interactions. And it's just a super fun experience. So I want to share a little bit about how this email works. This email is actually pretty simple. If we look at the pin itself, we start with the pin wrapper. We've got a class here, and this is just basic CSS HTML. Anyone who's building an email can work with this part. And that pin wrapper is what applies the gray overlay. It also contains other kind of foundational CSS that wraps up what this pin object is. Where AMP starts coming in is with this next bit, this blue bit, on equals tap colon, pin close-up. So what that tells AMP is that when I tap on this object, that it should trigger the element with the ID pin close-up. So very simply, it's a really simple directive, and that's all it does. It's all it can do is tap, and then it triggers it. It triggers an already hidden element. Let's talk about what that element is. So right here, there we go. Right here is the close-up element. So that's an AMP light box. And you can see it's set to layout no display, which tells it to hide initially. That's literally just applying a display none CSS attribute to it. But since it starts hidden, that means that AMP knows that it can lightbox this and it can open it up. It's got the ID pin close-up. And again, once we hit that pin that's got a roll of a button, it knows inherently. There's nothing you have to do. This is built into AMP. This is literally all you have to do to create these lightboxes. And then the Lightbox itself is really simple, CSS and HTML. We've got a nav bar, pin image div, and then on the right, pin details. Everything about the guiding principles here are all standard CSS HTML. One of the great things is you notice there's no tables here either. AMP gives you control in a way that we've never had in email. You can use divs. You can use positioning. You know what the email is going to look like. So next up, we also have the in-grid save button. And if I tap on that, that's going to open another light box. This one is called repin. You can see that in green there. And what I wanted to talk about here is another type of action where after I click that save button here in the board picker, what it's going to do is close the repin dialog, and it's going to submit a form. And that's how we get the data about what you saved to the back end. This starts to get a little bit more technical, but almost everything about this, anyone who is building email HTML today should be able to build this sort of features in AMP. Right? AMP is a really rich tool set, but that doesn't mean that everything about it is complicated. So right now, well, later this year, whenever Gmail actually releases the thing, you'll be able to do this sort of stuff. The other email we built is this topic picker email. Now, this one is a little more complicated. This one's really rich. This is all in the inbox. This is a real AMP email. You can see the CTA button's disabled. I can't tap it. I have to interact with the email. And that interaction is that I need to follow 5 topics. So I can tap them. I can scroll within the body of the email. And then for you real email dorks here, I just scrolled the email itself. So there's 2 different scrolling elements here. I think that's really fun to show you how these mini applications work. I can tab through to different options and find the interests that are really great for me. And then I can follow those interests. Once they're ready, you can see the top is counting down, and now it's all set. The CTA button is set to done, and I'm able to proceed. I can go on, it builds my home feed, and then it sends it to the server. And if there's a problem, there's an error state. So this is again, a real mini application. This is the one that the engineer who built it, Ting Ting, she said, oh, this one was fun. Okay, everyone's got their own definition of fun. This is part of the code for this email. This is a little bit more complicated, I would say, as somebody who's not a good coder, definitely. That is just the code for the CTA button. What it's doing is it's telling it when it should be disabled, what the value of the text should be, and what CSS class it should have. But this is where it gets complicated. If we want to do things like this in the inbox, you need to have the right tools, technology, and team. This is not going to be the sort of thing that just everybody can whip out. But that doesn't mean there isn't things that people can do with AMP that anyone can do. Last, as excited as I am about all this interactivity, personalization and knowing your audience is still the greatest driver of success that you can have. This winter, we rolled out a new personalization algorithm that was able to identify seasonal things, and you can see here, clicks increased 5 or 6% from this experiment. So we saw before, interactivity in the inbox is maybe a 0.5% or 1% lift. With understanding your audience and getting the right content, you're gonna get much bigger gains. So with that, I wanna leave you with 3 takeaways. 1, basic interactivity using CSS and HTML, everyone can do today, and it can be impactful, right? When it adds to your email experience, it can really bring more engagement. AMP is interesting, but really far off. It's gonna be really fascinating to see when Gmail rolls it out, what consumer adoption looks like, how do people feel about it. But we don't know enough yet, so don't plan to spin up a bunch of engineering effort on it. And last, the thing that really matters is getting the right message to your audience. The message is going to resonate with them, and being able to segment your audience where necessary to get that message on an individual basis to them. And with that, I want to pass it to Jens, who is going to tell us about how Shinesty gets that right message to their audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys, just a couple minutes. Thank you. Just a couple minutes until lunch. I'm Jens. Oh, there we go. I'm Jens. I'm the CMO at Shinesty. We're a brand of irreverent apparel. And I was asked to speak to you guys about how our unconventional approach to email has been successful, which basically means going back to the Stone Age of email. There will be no AMP discuss going forward. But I realize a lot of you don't know who I am or what Shinesty is. So we're a brand of, like I said, irreverent apparel that exists to force the world to stop taking itself so seriously. We sell thousands of products for hundreds of events. Basically, any of the social times in your life when you're with good people and having a good time, that's where we want to be there to enhance your social life. And our marketing philosophy is pretty simple. We try to drive entertainment and sales in equal parts. And a lot of people ask us, why aren't you always selling? And that's because finding buyers at any given time is like finding a needle in a haystack. There's actually an economics principle. It's called the 3% rule. It says that at any given time, actually only about 3% of your audience is ready to buy. Try combining that with selling denim printed Miami meat tents, and that number gets divided up quite a bit. So we needed an approach to marketing and to email that would allow us to communicate with a very large audience all the time, even if only a very small fraction of them are actually ready to buy at any given moment. So it should come as no surprise that our approach to email is very simple. We try to keep them laughing so they keep opening. At the end of the day, we're just trying to create a long-term relationship with our customers, keep engaging them for a long time, giving them real entertainment value, so that when they are ready to buy that denim printed Jito, that we haven't burned them out. This is what most e-commerce retail companies send. They're jam-packed with product, there's not a lot of story to them, they're generic, in a lot of cases across different brands, and within a brand from email to email. And they tend to be packed with a lot of deals. These are what we send. They're digestible, they're irreverent, they're unexpected, they're highly visual, and they change every single week. And they're also inherently rooted in products and the psychology that drive our business. This is a really important point because as we've tried to balance this entertainment and sales spectrum, you can go too far to one side. You can entertain people too much and come off like a media company, but eyeballs aren't what pays the bill for us. People buying products are what pays the bills for us. Yes, I'm wearing the one in the bottom left. But ultimately, people love them. We get replies to this every single time we send it. We get replies like these every single time we send an email. We've had as much as 1% and 2% reply rates depending on the email, as I will show you guys. I say this, every email program is wildly different. I put these up there to show you that being unconventional can still drive really exceptional results. And I'll draw attention to two numbers. First is that $99 sender score. You can do this and still maintain a really great reputation online. And that 20% of our active subscribers are opening 9 out of 10 emails we send them. Essentially, we've created a ravenous group of people. People are waiting for the next email from us, and they're opening it immediately, and they're doing that every single time. So with that, I'm gonna, that kind of concludes the background portion, and it's gonna be a little more show and tell going forward. I'm gonna really talk about 3 different concepts. One, consistency across all touch points, how every email that we send is wrapped in this strategy. Second, our continuously variable campaigns, some of the areas of inspiration that we look to continue to send new novel emails every single week, sometimes multiple times per week. And then, the authentic cohesive humor that goes throughout, some of the tenets of our brand that really work their way into every email we send. So with that, I'm gonna start with consistency at every touch point. And this is really important to us for a lot of reasons. This is not just unique to email, but when it comes to email, it begins on site. The first thing people see before they join our list is, unless we're testing something, it's this message, or usually something fairly similar to it. The point is to be in your face, and it's to set a tone for our emails that they're gonna be very different than what you've come to expect from a lot of companies like us. And that leads into our first email, which I've censored heavily. And I'm going to shamelessly plug that you guys should all subscribe to our emails right now if you want to see what this is, what actually comes through here. So I should see, 200-300 email subscribe-ups in the next couple minutes. I'll wait. The point of this email is really just to give people an introduction to the format of our emails. There's almost no product in it. I mean, there's product categories in it, but it's not trying to drive sales. It's trying to introduce people to this really digestible, listicle style format that we do to show them that no matter what, whether we're talking about sunglasses, socks, or something else, that it's gonna be funny, it's gonna be irreverent. And And it doesn't matter what time of the year we send it, whether it's Christmas or Valentine's Day or something else. So it's really just a light touch way to get people excited for all of the other emails where sales is a much more important objective for us. But in the span of emails, abandoned carts are really big for us. This is actually a big needle mover, and it's one of those ones where it would be really easy to just jam product on them, try to get them to buy. And there is an easy way where we go way too far across the spectrum, and we do entertain people too much when really this is a time when we're trying to give a gentle reminder to buy. But we try to be a little bit funny. It actually looks like a "Have you seen my lost child?" Milk carton. Or we get our private investigator involved, Carter Recovery, and yes, that flies over a lot of people's heads. But transactional emails in general, if you're like us, these are actually some of the most open and engaged with emails that we send. They've got really important, valuable details for your customers in there. So they tend to open them. They tend to store them. And it's also some of the emails that are the easiest to glance over. They're not these big, glamorous campaigns and product releases, but they do get opened to such an incredible degree, sometimes 40, 50% higher than our campaign averages. And so it's a really great opportunity for us to give people entertainment value and tell them that even if it's a small, simple email, the details of our humor aren't going to be lost. We're still going to include that there. This is actually Sir Tobin. He's our carrier pigeon. And so our transactional emails, depending on the email and depending on the season, go through his many, many escapades, whether he's getting hammered on Irish coffees, at the local hot tub, hanging out with Sir Richard Branson in the British Virgin Islands. If you guys buy a lot of products, you guys can get the full experience of Sir Tobin. Awesome. Next are our continuously variable campaigns. So again, a lot of people ask us, how do you guys come up with these new topics every single week, sometimes multiple times a week? These are a couple of areas that we look for inspiration. The first is to keep things timely. So obviously, if things are relevant and they're happening right then, people are going to be a lot more receptive to it. So we sell a lot of NFL blazers. And when it came time to do our kind of end of the season sale around the playoffs, we introduced a very timely campaign that was variable discounts depending on how your product or how your team did during the season, which meant that we gave away hundreds of free Cleveland Browns jackets. And we reduced the price of the Patriots blazer by exactly the PSI that a ball is supposed to be inflated to. And because the Chiefs did pretty well, we actually marked that up even further. And people still bought it. Another thing is to keep things topical. So this is our Mardi Gras email from this year. Mardi Gras, it's a pretty niche holiday when it comes down to it, when you compare it to St. Patrick's Day or Christmas or the 4th of July, things like that. And so this is one of those times where we needed a way to entertain a lot of people, even though very few people were going to be traveling to New Orleans to celebrate this. And so we introduced the Bayou Dictionary, basically talking about some hilarious slang that happens in the region. And people, even if they weren't planning to buy a fleur-de-lis suit, just ate this up. My personal favorite is Tuesday. After Monday comes Tuesday. Another is to keep things informative. So the 4th of July is a really big holiday for us, and the selling season is quite long. It actually is from May to June, and we try to send a lot of emails on it, sometimes with the same product in it. So keeping things informative is one of those things that we do to make things very interesting. Even if people have already seen the product, they've already seen a bunch of American flag products from us and themed emails from us. So in this one, we basically, just to get people fired up about the holiday and about this country, we scoured the internet, calculated some stats that would really get people excited, even if they'd already made their purchase, or even if they had not. Another one is to keep things rooted in pop culture. So this was another 4th of July email, and we got some data back about the use of dating apps in our audience. And so we created a bunch of different dating profiles. There was JDate, Hinge, Bumble, Grindr, Farmers Only, you name it. We created a profile for it, just as another way to keep things very interesting in this in the holiday, especially as we were sending multiple American flag emails back to back. And finally, these are a couple of the tenets of our brand that really work their way into our emails and that we don't tend to see from a lot of other companies. But we think by doing some of these things, it helps our brand stand out 10 times more than all the other brands who kind of follow a similar path. The first is to actually sometimes tell people who we are, to like literally give people a glimpse behind the scenes, to create characters, and not Sir Tobin type characters, but actually Nick, our developer, or Brittany, one of our warehouse team, Ben, the guy who writes the vast majority of these emails. It's to tell people who we are, to give them a glimpse behind the scenes and kind of, break down that anonymity that usually happens when between a brand and a consumer, to show that there are real people that are very much like our customers behind the scenes. And sometimes that also involves saying who we are not. The next is something that we've done a lot, and a lot more recently because it's been so incredibly effective, and that's to be radically transparent with people, to break the fourth wall, to show that we're fallible and human. And until the final email that I'm going to show you, which is next, this was the single most effective email that we ever sent. And the story is pretty funny. This was around St. Patrick's Day. We had designed this great new blazer. It is that beautiful one featuring a 4-leaf clover. And we put it up while we were developing the email. We'd already put it onto other digital ad channels, and we started to get some feedback on it. That's probably pretty small. But I'll read Tom, because I think he's a great example. Too bad it's not a shamrock on the jacket, which is Irish. You have a 4-leaf clover, which is not Irish. Very disappointing. Another company making items for St. Patrick's Day with the wrong photo. Bummer. So we replied to him, don't worry, Tom. We fired everyone on the design team. Idiots. And we fired the design team, became the subject line for this email. And we got hundreds of replies to this. People coming to bat for us. People who are really resonating with like, oh my God, I can't believe you guys not only messed up the blazer, but the dress, and the jacket, and the shirt, and the underwear, and everything else that we had applied this print to. People ate it up. It showed that we were fallible, and gave people a really interesting glimpse behind the scenes. And then finally, this was actually our Easter email, which, if you're like us, actually there was a second holiday that fell on Easter this year. And that is April Fool's. And for April Fool's, we actually detailed our fictitious, I don't know if there's anyone from Kohl's in the audience. Please don't send us a cease and desist if you are. Announce our acquisition by Kohl's, and we told them that we were ultimately going to be the same brand. We were going to turn it over into the capable hands of the Kohl's brand management team and gave them a glimpse into our new product line and some of the other features and benefits that they could look forward to from this acquisition. Everyday suits without patterns and prints. Cotton underwear without ball pouches. The savory scents of neighboring Longhorn steakhouses. Sober store clerks. Ultimately, this is one of those things that, could stand to piss a lot of people off. And a lot of people were pissed off, but not for the reasons you'd think, because it's so authentic to who our brand is, to be this snarky and this sarcastic. A lot of people were like, you guys are sellouts. I'll be dead if I'm ever going to be caught buying your stuff in Kohl's. Other people are like, congratulations, followed you guys from the beginning. So proud of you. Sorry, guys. Sorry to let you down in all cases. And if the only thing that was more entertaining for them than this email was the follow-up when we basically sent a screen grab of what our content calendar looked like from that day. It had the holidays, Easter, April Fool's Day, send Kohl's email campaign, post picture of creepy bunny, and then go to Easter brunch. And so I say this because you can do things that push the limits, that push back on your audience, because they're going to push right back on you, and it gives you a chance to engage with them one-to-one, really create a personalized discourse. So that's it for me. Thanks for listening. Time for lunch.